This is the Chuck Says Words Podcast with your host, Chuck Jackson. A show dedicated to navigating the complex world of building a service-based business, finding and leading successful teams, and not getting in your own way. Whether you are bootstrapping or have a plethora of investment cash, business is hard. So if you're ready to explore ways to make it easier, hear some wild stories, and walk away with some great anecdotes, then join us. This is where Chuck says words. Now, your host, Chuck Jackson.
Well, okay. Welcome to the Chuck Says Words Podcast. I'm your host, Chuck Jackson. I'm the founder and CEO of 9 Mitchell Consulting. You can find us on the web, on LinkedIn. Just search the number 9, Mitchell Consulting. You'll find us. So what we do is we help healthcare and human service providers do what they do better, right? We're talking all things clinical, operational, administrative, compliance, revenue cycle. We have a big hand in procedural things, risk management, quality management. Most of what we do is using a lot of lean methodologies, right? A lot of modern ways to run businesses in order to keep costs low, keep revenue cycles positive, and, kind of meet one of our missions, which is, no margin, no mission. And even when we work with some of our clients that are nonprofits, the idea that you're nonprofit means that you're no profit is absurd, because if you don't have positive revenues, then you're not going to be around for very long. But so anyways, come see us, 9 Mitchell Consulting. You can find us on the web, on LinkedIn. Engage with us. If you ever have any questions about anything that we talk about in the podcast or on any of our social media channels, which we are currently growing, feel free to hop in and, chat with us. In this episode of Chuck Says Words, if you did listen to the last episode, you had actually probably learned that I, Chuck, have cancer. And we've actually created some social media channels out there. So if you just search Chuck Fights Cancer all over the interweb, you will find us. We're on TikTok, LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn, Chuck Jackson there, but you can find us by looking up Chuck Jackson or looking up 9 Mitchell Consulting. We have a decent sized LinkedIn following, so you'll be able to find us there, but check us out on those socials. You can follow my daily updates. I am currently going through chemo treatment. In the fall, I went through chemo radiation, which is a combination of chemo, 2 rounds with 30 business days of radiation. And it actually effectively cured my cancer, except it did metastasize and move. So I share all that to say the way I look today, I'm not going to keep looking this way. I am anticipated to lose all of my hair. I'm going to be bald as a cue ball, go out there, get a little bit of sun. We'll see how this round dome looks. Haven't seen my chin since 2013, so just kind of hold on to it for as long as we can. But I bring up that diagnosis because it can be a shock to people in the world, right? You don't see someone for a little bit, then you run into them in the grocery store or out and about, or you meet them at a work event, or just bump into them somewhere and they look drastically different. Cancer and chemo can do this to people, right? You go through chemo, you lose hair, you lose weight, all those things can happen. You can look run down. And even though I haven't outwardly shown all of these things yet, I anticipate it happening. And one of the things that, I will share things about my treatment journey. You can always find, like I said, I recommend TikTok. We're growing a little bit of a following there. We're over 500 followers. We've been doing it for a little more than 2 weeks now. People are really engaging with us on there. So, go find us, Chuck Fights Cancer. I say that to say this. My diagnosis really has alerted me to some of the inefficiencies out there in the healthcare system, right? Because now I'm not just working in the industry as a lifelong professional. I am also living the dream, so to speak. I am a heavy consumer of healthcare in the United States. And so I've had the intimate opportunity to see from the patient perspective how some facilities operate versus others. And my family and I, one of the things that we chose to do is seek our treatment through the Mayo Clinic in Arizona. It's based in, they have sites in Phoenix and Scottsdale. The big hospital is in Northeast Phoenix, right on the Scottsdale border. And if you're familiar with Arizona, you know it's sunny here 300 to 330 days a year. It's super hot for 4 to 6 months out of the year. The winters are gorgeous, lots of golf, lots of sun. It's beautiful, right? But now that we're living out in Phoenix and we're getting treatment at the Mayo Clinic, I've had the unique opportunity to see how they do some things. When I'm talking about some things, I am talking about some legitimate procedural steps that they take to make their patient experience top-notch. I'm talking top 1% out of all the experiences I've ever had have fallen at the Mayo Clinic, and I will give them props for that because as a consumer, you know, you go in, you find harsh diagnoses, you talk about your treatment goals, you talk about the things you're going to do, and, you know, they have to set up these appointments, and you have to go different cadences, schedules. You show up at different times, different days for different treatments with different providers and all of these things. But I actually wanted to talk about a situation with me specifically at the end of last summer, at the end of August last year, when we were getting my very first diagnosis that really alerted me to the differences in health systems out there, right? So let me paint the picture for you. And we're, you know, again, Chuck Says Words podcast, right? We're going to kind of rebrand a little bit. We're early yet, so I think it's the right time to do it. We're going to rebrand as the Chuck Says Words podcast, navigating health in life and business, right? So we're going to still talk about the business that we do, what our consulting firm does, what we do with clients. We're also going to talk about that life piece, right? And we just think it's the right time to do it. So, you know, we're just going to chronicle some of my journey, some of the things that I go through out there, and hope that we can highlight some scenarios and case studies, you know, and give some advice to people so that those who listen to us, whether they consume or they provide healthcare services, are able to benefit from those experiences and then do what they do better, right? So let me paint this picture. It's last March 2022. I'm in Arizona. My family and I are living in Western New York, in the Rochester, New York area. And I'm down in Phoenix for about a week and a half. We're meeting with some clients. We're doing business stuff. Everything's going swell. I'm on the plane ride back home. It's a direct flight, Phoenix to Buffalo. I like that flight because it's direct, right? And I get this sudden shooting pain down my left leg, and it's consistent with sciatica, so we're not going to go too deep into that, but that's March 19th. Remember the day clear as day. And I get back home. I try to get a hold of my PCP, my primary care provider, and I can't get in until the already scheduled May 6th appointment. They're fully booked, and it was hard to get that appointment because I was actually looking for a new primary care practitioner, just for some, you know, personal reasons and whatnot. And so I'm stuck, right? It's roughly 6 weeks before I can see them. Well, I get in 6 weeks later. Up until that point, I'd been managing my pain with just some stretches I found online and, you know, Tylenol and ibuprofen. Well, I go see the doc. Doc sends me out for some x-rays and an MRI. Well, just x-rays at the time. And they say, it looks like you have potentially a bulging disc. Let's send you for physical therapy. Well, I have to wait to get scheduled for physical therapy, and physical therapy starts June 12th, which is 5 weeks after I see my PCP. It's a little rough, but I get in June 12th, and the first session goes all right. June 19th, the next week's session, it goes all right. That evening, I come down with just excruciating pain in my lower back, middle hip area, and it's just excruciating, right? Some of the worst pain I'd ever felt in my life, brought me to my knees and to tears. Well, I was able to get back in to see another doc in my office the following Monday. Now, June 19th, if memory serves, was a Thursday. They were able to see me on Monday, sent me out for an MRI, more x-rays. Decided to confirm at that point that the imaging shows a serious bulge, and send me out to get seen by an orthopedic doctor, an orthopedic surgeon actually. And that appointment ends up happening on or around July 15th. I don't remember the exact date. That's not really material. But I get in, I see the orthopedist. We go through all the symptoms that he has listed in front of him, shows me the imaging. We talk about a game plan. We talk about potentially doing some shots in my back. It's a lumbar bulging disc, and we talk about that. And I say, hey doc, I've got a few other symptoms, right? And for the sake of this podcast, I'm not going to get into great detail about that, but like I said, go find us on TikTok, Chuck Fights Cancer, or Facebook or Instagram under the same handles, and you'll be able to hear more in depth about that. Anyways, so we talk about some of those symptoms, and he says unequivocally, there's no way this bulge that I'm looking at can cause those symptoms. So what's he do? Hooks me up with a pelvic MRI that I get on August 4th. One thing you can see in this chain of events so far is that through the health system I was being seen at, there is a substantial delay between getting referred to and then scheduling these different bouts of imaging or these different appointments, right? Like at this point, the initial injury happened March 19th. Now we are roughly in the middle. Now we're at the beginning of August, right? So what's that? April, May, June, July, 4.5 to 5 months in before I get a pelvic MRI. And what's the pelvic MRI show? A tumor that's more than 10 centimeters long and more than 4 centimeters wide. That's like 6 by 2.5 inches, give or take. It's a very large tumor. And where it's living, again, full disclosure, but also try not to be too graphic on this podcast. That tumor is hanging outside of my rectum, pushing up against my prostate, my bladder, my tailbone. It's just filling up the space in there, causing me all kinds of grief, all kinds of pain. And we meet with the rectal surgeon the following week. I get scoped and biopsied and everything. And this is, mind you, roughly the 12th of August, right? Well, my wife had the forethought because we had already been planning to move to Arizona in December anyways. We already had paid for the move, like we were ready to roll. But she had the forethought to get a second opinion because some of the things we were hearing from the rectal surgeon was people with this type of cancer, this type of tumor, which it wasn't even fully diagnosed yet because they couldn't get a clean biopsy from it, which I'll get to in a second, was that they would remove it. And in order to remove it, they would remove basically everything it's touching, which includes prostate, part of my rectum, my anus, my bladder, part of my bladder, shaved part of my tailbone. And I could be walking around with multiple bags the rest of my life. Well, that's a scary proposition. My wife, with the amazing forethought, decides to open up a case with the Mayo Clinic in Arizona where we're moving anyways. And there's 3 very good, I would say 3 extremely good cancer hospitals, cancer systems out here. There's Ironwood, MD Anderson, which is part of Banner, and then the Mayo Clinic. And, the reason they all exist in the same area is because we're one of the top 5 metro areas out here in Phoenix. In the U.S., our healthcare is actually pretty good. And everybody wants to snowbird here, right, if they're seeking treatment. So it totally works. But we decide I'm going to take a super secret, quiet trip out to Arizona for 10 days at the end of April and end of August and beginning of September. So I come out, and in the equivalent of 7 business days, I get 4 different rounds of imaging, 4 different appointments with specialists. I get another flexible scope biopsy, and I had multiple rounds of blood draws in 7 business days. During that time, the medical system I was still seeing up in Rochester had scheduled my first CT scan for September 15th. So in the time between seeing the rectal surgeon in New York and the very first scan, which was a CT scan that they were going to do, that was going to be about a month. In that time, I came to Arizona, the Mayo Clinic, and spent 10 calendar days, saw all the specialists, got all the workup, and they scheduled me for a PET scan on September 16th and a biopsy under anesthesia on the 19th, September 19th. My second scan scheduled in New York was for September 24th. And they said, if you can get here for these, let's do them. We want to diagnose as soon as possible, get it in front of our tumor board, figure out the right treatment options, and start treatment as soon as possible. Because that's how we, the Mayo Clinic, keep people alive. And I say, heck yeah, right? So we do. I get back to New York. I fly back on September 4th, call the movers. They come pick up everything on September 9th. We're in Arizona by September 14th. We're sticking around in an Airbnb, waiting for our house to get ready, everything. I go and get the imaging, the PET scan on the 16th. I go and get the biopsy under anesthesia on the 19th. They had pathology in the room on the 19th. It came back as squamous cell carcinoma, an anal cancer caused by the HPV P16 strain. Go hit us up, Chuck Fights Cancer on TikTok, and you'll learn all about that. We have some videos up about it. Anyways, it's a very rare form of cancer, especially for, at the time, a 41-year-old male with no behavioral markers for this type of thing. Like, it's rare. I'm not even old enough to have had a colonoscopy recommended yet, which may or may not have ever found this anyways, because it was actually lying outside of my rectum, right? It was not something that could be seen on the inside, except for a little bit of bulging. So wild, right? Well, anyway, so now I'm seeking treatment at the Mayo Clinic. We're officially in Arizona. The first round of chemo and radiation start on October 4th, and the second round of chemo is the first week of November. Each one was 5 days long. They hooked me up to a PICC line and an IV drip and all of these things. And, we don't need to get into the specifics of it, but here we are. We finished chemo radiation November 14th, right? Now, during that time, I get to go in every business day for radiation. I get to see the medical oncology team that's handling the chemo, the radiation oncology team that's handling the radiation. I get to see my palliative care for pain management because I was in excruciating pain. Do all these things. And let me tell you the difference. The difference between the Rochester medical system that I was seeing and the Mayo Clinic was night and day. And that is not to put down the University of Rochester Medical Center, URMC. That's a good health system. It's a very good teaching hospital. I give them a lot of credit for the things that they do. They're very forward-thinking in their research, and they're a very good health system. I do not want to take anything from them. But there is a big difference between living in Rochester, New York, with 1 million people or less in the whole county, than it is being in Phoenix, Arizona, with 6.5 million people and growing, right? One of the things I learned about the Mayo Clinic, and this is the case study part of all of this, is the Mayo Clinic doesn't do, and this is from talking to the providers there and talking to the nurses and just, having general chit chat. They ask me what it is I do. I tell them, and it really piques their interest because we're a consultant in the healthcare space, and we pride ourselves on being able to come up with really forward-thinking, lean, modern ways to run a business because healthcare is hard, right? And I'm talking to some of these folks, and one of the things I learned is the Mayo Clinic doesn't do anything fast. They give care fast. They do their jobs fast, but they don't make decisions in a bubble quickly for the sake of expediency or because they just feel like they have to, right? And I think that's incredible. And let me relay this. For the longest time, the Mayo Clinic was actually, this is one of the things I learned from one of the nurses that had to put an IV in me one day with an ultrasound machine. Apparently, the Mayo Clinic was one of the last major U.S. hospital systems to change from white scrubs to another color scrubs, whether pink or blue. Now, the Mayo Clinic in Arizona, they wear blue. And when we were talking about it, and I learned, they pulled everybody. They pulled patients, they pulled staff, they pulled ex-staff, they pulled referral sources, all about the colors of the scrubs that they'd allow, because they had been white forever, apparently. And I asked that question, I'm like, well, why would they do that, right? Well, it only makes so much sense, right? It can seem like the smallest little detail what color your scrubs are in a hospital, right? But there's a certain level of consistency that your patients are going to expect. And if you're the type of health center where any color scrubs can be welcomed, that can cause confusion for your patients. Also, why blue? Why not pink? Why not orange? Why not on the pediatric units just allow you to wear all sorts of funky colors? Again, it's the patient experience. And the thing that I learned, and just talking about that one example, is the Mayo Clinic takes their decision-making so seriously that when they're getting this data, they always offer options to see what people think. And one of the things they found out is that Blue is one of those calming, welcoming colors, and blue is one of the colors that is most commonly associated with the healthcare, with the practice of healthcare. And so patients showed in their data, apparently. Now, I didn't see this firsthand. This was all relayed to me, so I don't know how much I'm missing, but the individual that was sharing it with me had been there for more than 15 years at this point. So I have no reason not to believe him. And they asked questions on that and their patient surveys for about 6 months, over and over again. If we were to change the color of our scrubs, which ones would you choose and why? It was a text box form on their survey. And so people had to give their comments, and they found overwhelmingly blue was the most welcome color. So they changed to blue. They didn't just say one day, hey, start wearing blue scrubs, or give everyone a uniform allowance and just say, go buy blue scrubs to replace the ones you have. They didn't just do that on a whim. They actually took the time to roll out a full-scale training program explaining why they are doing what they're doing, why they're choosing what they're choosing, explaining all of the data behind it that led to those decisions, and then allowing the staff to talk with the patients as the patients are like, hey, we see your scrubs are different. Why you look so different? Now they can talk about this. Now that does a couple of things. One thing is now you're not going to get as many people complaining, oh, I have all these white scrubs, I don't want to buy blue ones, it's going to cost money. I get that. But when you explain a decision and the rationale behind the decision, a lot of people are going to accept that decision easier. And that's just the truth of data and business and decision making. The second thing it did is it made their staff, for the most part, their biggest champions. And in the healthcare industry, who are the people that help patients have the best experiences? It's the people that work directly with them. So, okay, it's starting to make sense, right? Well, that's one of the things that we actually, and this is taking the case study of my personal experience and learning about this with the Mayo Clinic to what it is that we do with our clients, right? A lot of our clients are either startups or small companies struggling to scale. And one of the things that we've learned is that startups are all too, this is really an interesting topic that comes up way more frequently than you'd think it would based on, some basic Google searches. But the startups we work with, when we don't get on board early on in the process and we're not part of the things that cause them to get licensed or accredited or anything like that, a lot of startup healthcare companies have a tendency to just purchase out-of-the-box policies and procedures that read like they're good from people selling them for, I don't know why this is, but the most common price point we hear is $10,000. I'll hand you this package in a binder and you'll get licensed. The problem with that is out-of-the-box policies, they were written at one time for one person, and now they're just being regurgitated over and over again to all these different levels of care, all these different types of places. And no two healthcare organizations operate the same. So we hear this all the time, right? Policies and procedures. It's terrible. Just policies. Just got to know them all and have to find them all. And God, are they outdated? Like all these problems can exist. But when the startups get the out of the box, pay this guy $10,000, he gives us a cutesy binder and we can get licensed, they don't know what's in them. Rarely. And even if they do, and they took the time to read them and know them, there's no way they can do them all. Not the way they're written, not out of the box like that. Because if they don't want to be a cookie cutter program, why would they use cookie cutter procedures? That's the procedural part of policies and procedures that tell you how to do the things you're doing. So we run into that all the time, right? And the other side are not the startups. They've been in business sometimes. They're struggling to scale. Why are they struggling to scale? Policies and procedures. Chances are they're out of date. They're not accurate to the real processes. The systems are different. The staffing needs are different. When you're trying to scale and you're moving to bigger buildings or opening second buildings, expanding your facilities, what have you, you are running into logistical challenges that were not in your original policies and procedures. And I say policies and procedures knowing that, just to break it down into a simple aspect for our listeners, is A policy is what you're going to do, and a procedure is how you do it. And within that procedure, sometimes it's just a simple step-by-step, 4, 5, 6-step process to get something done the same way every single time. Sometimes it's a larger protocol that has flow charts and, a step-by-step, if this, then that in certain situations to help decision-making, right? But in either such situation, it's the procedural aspect of those policies and procedures that are almost universally wrong at most organizations. And I know that sounds like an overgeneralization, but I've been in this racket a long time, and I can tell you, just some bogus data, somewhere between 60 and 80% of providers don't even know what's written in their policies and procedures. And they wonder sometimes when something were to occur, licensing comes out, accreditation comes out, they get their triannual joint commission survey, and they get asked this seemingly innocuous question about a process or a system that they have. And somebody answers with what their practice is, what they do, and it doesn't match what's written down. Well, that's a problem, because somebody else somewhere might be looking at it written down and trying to do it that way, and they'd be expected to know how somebody else in the organization does it, even though it's not written down. And not documenting your actual procedures is the way you're going to get into trouble. So let me bring that whole discussion full circle and say, the thing about the Mayo Clinic is, and it does not matter which department I'm talking to, if it's a nurse, if it's an NP, if it's a PA, if it's a med tech, if it's a receptionist, if it's a doc, if it's not within their scope, they will punt to the right person in their scope. But it is amazing how well every single person that I talk to knows the system and the way it's supposed to be done. Now, in the older days of healthcare and any type of business, if we're being honest, before the days of being able to standardize things, the person who knew how to do the thing was usually the master. They would hand train or directly teach new people how to do it their way. They may or may not ever bring out those policies and procedures, or in some businesses they call them standard operating protocols, SOPs, right? They may never bring those out and never show them to somebody, but they'll teach them how they do it. I can tell you from just experiencing the Mayo Clinic in multiple buildings and multiple floors and multiple ways and seeing how they do it the same, there's no way that they do that. They have a dedicated training and education program to make sure when they hire people on, that people are doing it as consistently as possible, because the greatest risk to profitability of any human services or healthcare organization is variation between the way people do it. Let me repeat that. The biggest risk to profitability is when more than one person does something differently. Think about that. Think of all the times in either your business or business you work in or somewhere where you get care. One person says, oh, I do it this way, and another person says, oh, I do it this way, and they do things differently. And when you call, who's the one caught in the middle being frustrated because things are done differently depending on who's on? You, the patient, the consumer of the product or service. So it's no surprise to me that the URMC system, while giving good care for all intents and purposes, took so heinously long for me to see anybody about anything ever. But then when I come to the Mayo Clinic, it doesn't matter what building, what floor, what department I'm talking to, I get told the exact same things. They clearly coordinate between the departments, and whenever I talk to somebody on the phone, they're interchangeable people. I'm all for differences in personality. Well, I'm not all for differences in variation of procedure. And that is one of the things that I just really wanted to lay out there, right? Is just know that your procedures matter. And with this little case study where we talk about my personal journey with my diagnosis and the Mayo Clinic and all the good that they do, just know our tip is also the more human variation you let in, the more likely you are going to have challenges maintaining profitability, maintaining positive margins, and staying in business, right? So I think with that, I'll stop harping on that and say this. Even if you ever have a question about, hey, I don't even understand policies and procedures, engage us. Find us on LinkedIn. I kid you not. We love having these talks. We love sharing the knowledge, sharing our experiences. And I'll be the first one to tell you, if you need help, we're there to help you. And we love the business. But even if you just have a general question, reach out. Like these are not the mysteries of the universe that are being hidden behind some paywall. We want people to understand this because in the end, it's important that people consuming these services are able to consume them reasonably, expediently, and in a way that is best able to maintain their health, right? So anyways, with that, I think we're coming up at about 30 minutes. So I think I'm going to end this episode of the Chuck Says Words podcast and just give that last little tip. And maybe I'll phrase it in another way, but you can be one of two kinds of organizations. You can be a people organization or a process organization. Now, your people matter. I'm not saying they don't. What I am saying, though, is when you allow people to be the variation, it will be different every single time. Whereas if you allow your process to stand on its own, independent of the human being doing it, you will make the consumer experience, the patient experience, so much better that some other random that went to see you at some point will have a podcast in 3 years talking about his cancer diagnosis and why you are the provider, the exceptional provider that gave him the happy-go-lucky feelings about going to seek their care for you. So just remember that. Processes over people is how you give the best care. Okay. So with that, we'll come to a close this episode of the Chuck Says Words podcast. You can find us LinkedIn, look up 9 Mitchell Consulting. Also, go check out Chuck Fights Cancer. It's a growing little movement. Like I said, we're over 500 followers on TikTok. We're sharing my journey day in and day out. And soon we're going to be putting up a website, and anyone that wants to help out monetarily or whatnot with fighting this disease, not me personally, but raising money for fighting this disease. We're going to have some events and some things happening here pretty soon. And so stay tuned. Again, thanks for tuning in. Episode 6 of the Chuck Says Words podcast. Do well. Hope you all do great.
All topics discussed on this podcast were for information purposes only. Please seek a licensed legal or medical professional whenever necessary. If you need help with the strategy or direction of your service-based business, you can find our team at 9mitchell.com.